The wine hit her face before the room even went quiet. Red, cold, sharp with the smell of oak and something bitter underneath, like it had been sitting open too long. It ran down her cheek, past her jaw, and dripped onto the white silk dress she'd picked out 3 weeks ago because Griffin said white made her look presentable. 200 guests stood frozen with champagne glasses halfway to their mouths. Griffin Halloway stood over his wife with an empty glass in his hand and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "That's for embarrassing me," he said, loud enough for the band to stop playing, "in front of my own father's guests, my own anniversary party." Somewhere near the bar, a woman named Priscilla Dunmore lowered her glass an inch. She wasn't looking at the wine. She was looking at Ren Halloway's wrist, where a thin gold watch had slipped out from under her sleeve for exactly 2 seconds before Ren tucked it back under the fabric. Priscilla had seen a watch like that once before, in a magazine, on the wrist of a woman worth more than the hotel they were standing in. She said nothing. Not yet. Griffin laughed, waving his hand like he was shooing away a fly. "Don't worry, it's fake. Ren doesn't own anything real. Do you, sweetheart?" The room laughed with him. That's the part that should make you angry, not the wine, not even the cruelty. It's that 200 people laughed with him, and not one of them asked why a man needs an audience to feel like a king. Ren didn't cry. She didn't wipe her face. She stood there with wine sliding off her chin, and she smiled. Small, calm, almost polite, like a woman filing something away for later. "Is that really what you think of me?" she asked. Griffin smirked and turned back to his guests. "I don't think about you at all." Nobody in that ballroom knew it yet, but that sentence was going to cost him everything. Before we go further, if you've ever been underestimated by someone who was supposed to love you, someone who mistook your silence for weakness, drop a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from, and hit subscribe, because what happens to Griffin Halloway over the next 72 hours is the kind of ending you don't want to miss the first half of. Now, let's go back 3 weeks so you understand exactly how a man humiliates the one person who could destroy him without knowing that's exactly what he's doing. Highland Park, Texas doesn't look like a place where anyone suffers. The lawns are cut in perfect stripes. The mailboxes cost more than most people's cars. Every Sunday, the church parking lot fills with luxury SUVs that never seem to get dirty, as if dirt itself knew better than to touch this zip code. Ren Halloway had lived here for 11 years, in a house with 6 bedrooms and a name on the deed that wasn't her own maiden name. To her neighbors, she was Griffin Halloway's wife. Quiet, polite, the one who remembered your kid's birthday but never talked about her own family. Nobody asked where Ren came from. In Highland Park, that's considered rude, mostly because everyone's a little afraid of what they might find out. Griffin, on the other hand, was impossible not to know. 38 years old, sharp-jawed, the kind of handsome that made people forgive him for things they shouldn't. He'd taken his father's construction and land company, Halloway Group, and turned it into something that touched half the skyline of Dallas. City council members took his calls personally. 2 state senators had eaten dinner at his table. People said Griffin Halloway could get a stop sign moved if he wanted to. What people didn't know, what even Griffin didn't fully understand, was that Halloway Group should have collapsed 6 years ago. It almost had. Twice. The first time was during the land dispute with the county, back when Griffin's father, Bennett Halloway, nearly lost the family's original 40 acres to a seizure claim nobody saw coming. Bennett had aged 10 years in a single month. Griffin was too busy chasing a hotel deal in Austin to notice his father wasn't sleeping. Somebody paid off that claim. Quietly. In full. Cash adjacent, untraceable, wired through something called the Ashcombe Family Trust, a name nobody at that dinner table recognized. Bennett never asked who saved his land. He was too relieved to ask questions. Griffin never asked either. He just noticed his father seemed lighter that spring, and assumed the problem had solved itself. The way rich men sometimes assume storms, simply choose to pass them by. The second near collapse came 2 years later, when Halloway Group's biggest lender pulled out overnight after a bad quarter. Griffin spent 6 sleepless weeks trying to save the company, yelling at bankers, firing 2 vice presidents, blaming everyone but himself. Then, mysteriously, A new line of credit appeared. Favorable terms. No collateral required. Approved in 4 days, which anyone in banking will tell you should take 4 months. Griffin took the credit line and told his board he'd called in a favor. He never once wondered who the favor actually came from. He should have wondered. If he had, he might have noticed his own wife sitting at the kitchen table some nights, phone pressed to her ear, voice low. "Yes, madam is fine," she'd say, when someone on the other end of the line asked to speak with her directly instead of using her name. "Hold the merger paperwork until Thursday." Griffin walked in on one of those calls exactly once. Wren hung up fast, said it was a wrong number, and went back to folding laundry like nothing had happened. "Why do these executive types keep calling you madam like you're somebody important?" Griffin asked once, laughing, not really wanting an answer. "Wrong numbers happen a lot in Texas," Wren said. "Big area code." He believed her. Why wouldn't he? The woman standing in front of him wore last season's dresses and drove a 5-year-old sedan. She clipped coupons, actual paper coupons, and reused Ziploc bags. She was, by every visible measure, exactly what Griffin had married her to be. Quiet, grateful, small. Here's a question worth sitting with. How many people in your life have you decided you already understand, simply because they never gave you a reason to look twice? After the wine incident, Wren didn't scream. She didn't throw anything. She went upstairs, peeled off the ruined silk dress, and instead of throwing it in the trash like any normal person would, she folded it carefully and placed it inside a cedar box at the back of her closet. This wasn't the first item in that box. There was a photograph of Bennett Halloway shaking hands with a hospital administrator, thanking him for surgery Bennett believed had been covered by his insurance. It hadn't been. Insurance had denied the claim. Wren paid the difference, $41,000, the same week, using an account with a name on it that meant nothing to anyone in this house. There was a folded bank letter confirming a scholarship fund for Griffin's 2 younger siblings, both of whom believed to this day that the Ashcombe Foundation was simply a generous stranger with good taste and tuition. There was a single wine cork, saved from a bottle Griffin had opened the night he proposed. Back then, his eyes had looked at her like she was the only interesting thing in the room. She used to wonder what happened to that look. Now she understood. It left the same year the company started making real money, and it never came back once Griffin decided he'd built the empire alone. She closed the box gently, like a woman closing a door on a room she wasn't ready to walk back into. Downstairs, the house was too quiet. And quiet in a house like this one was never actually peaceful. It was just the sound of a storm deciding when to start. The next morning, Griffin acted as though nothing had happened. He kissed her cheek at breakfast, told her the eggs were good, and left for the office humming. That was the part that scared her the most, if she was honest with herself. Not the wine. The forgetting. A man who could humiliate you at a party and then hum over breakfast the next morning was a man who had done it before, in smaller ways. So many times that this one barely registered to him. She had been counting those smaller ways for 3 years. That afternoon, Wren's phone rang. Unknown number, but she recognized the area code, New York. "Madam," said a voice she knew well, calm and clipped. "The Ashcombe Trust legal team needs your signature by Friday. The board vote on Halloway Group's succession plan is in 4 days. If you don't step in now, your husband signs full control over to himself and the outside investors he's been meeting with, quietly, without telling the family." Wren sat down slowly on the edge of her bed. "Without telling me, you mean?" she said. "Yes, madam, without telling you." 4 days. That was the clock, now ticking somewhere behind Wren's calm face while she stood in her kitchen making dinner for a man who thought her biggest secret was a fake watch. Somewhere in that same city, a woman named Jocelyn Kane was lying in Griffin Halloway's arms, laughing at something he'd whispered, and asking him, quite casually, whether the divorce papers would be ready by Friday. Wren didn't know that conversation was happening yet. But she was about to find out exactly how far her husband had gone, and exactly who had helped him. Griffin Halloway had a cousin-in-law named Jocelyn Kane. Everyone in the family liked her. She brought good wine to holidays, remembered everyone's coffee order, and had a laugh that made rooms feel warmer. What the family didn't know was that Jocelyn had been in Griffin's bed for 11 months, and in his ear for even longer. It started small. A late-night phone call about family business, a lunch that ran 2 hours, then a hotel room in Fort Worth that Jocelyn booked under a fake name, paid for with cash, because even a woman in love with someone else's husband knows better than to leave a paper trail. Jocelyn wasn't just sleeping with Griffin. She was feeding him information, small details about Wren's spending habits, her closed-door phone calls, the strange folder of documents Wren kept locked in a drawer that Jocelyn had photographed once while house-sitting. "She's hiding something," Jocelyn told Griffin one night, tracing a finger down his chest. "Bank statements, trust documents, some company called Ashcombe. You should look into it before she tries to take half of everything in a divorce." Griffin, who had already started imagining his life without Wren in it, filed that information away like a weapon he wasn't quite ready to use. He didn't know Jocelyn had motives of her own. She wasn't just chasing love. She was chasing what came after, a Holloway group with Griffin at the top, no annoying wife holding secret leverage, and a cousin conveniently available to become the next Mrs. Halloway. 3 nights after the wine incident, Wren found the recording. It happened by accident, the way most devastating discoveries do. She was looking for her charger in Griffin's study when she noticed his laptop still logged into a cloud drive he usually kept locked. A file sat at the top, recently modified. Party, full bet, unedited. She should have walked away. Instead, she pressed play. It was Griffin's voice, recorded weeks before the party, talking to a friend over drinks. "I'll bet you $1,000 I can pour a full glass of wine on Wren in front of everyone, and she won't say a word back. She never does. Watch." His friend had laughed. "That's cold, man." "That's marriage," Griffin had said. Wren sat very still, listening to her husband bet money on her humiliation weeks in advance, like she was a dog he was training. Somewhere underneath the recording, faintly, she heard Jocelyn's voice in the background of the same room, laughing at the plan along with everyone else. That's when the second file caught her eye. A string of messages between Griffin and Jocelyn, spanning months, ending 3 days ago with a message from Jocelyn that read, "Divorce papers ready Friday? I already picked our wedding date. Don't tell your mother yet." Wren didn't gasp. She didn't cry. She sat in the dark study with the laptop glowing in front of her, and for the first time in 3 years, she let herself feel the full weight of exactly how alone she'd been standing while pretending everything was fine. Here's the thing about betrayal: nobody tells you until you've lived it. It rarely arrives all at once. It arrives in layers, each one worse than the last, until you're standing in a room finding out that the joke, the affair, and the plan to erase you were never separate things. They were always the same plan. She closed the laptop. She didn't confront Griffin that night. Instead, she picked up her phone and called the one person who had never once treated her like she was small. "Elias," she said quietly. "It's time. Move everything." Griffin Halloway had built his empire on more than land deals. He'd built it on favors, the kind mega-rich men and mega-rich zip codes trade like currency. A donation here, a quiet word to a judge there, a campaign contribution timed perfectly before a zoning vote. 2 of Highland Park's most powerful men owed Griffin favors big enough to bury a body, metaphorically speaking. One was a state senator who needed a land rezoning pushed through fast. The other was a bank executive who needed a loan default quietly forgotten. Griffin decided it was time to collect. "I need the Halloway family trust vote pushed through my way," he told the senator over golf on Thursday morning. "Full control. No complications. My father's getting older. Somebody needs to steer this ship, and it isn't going to be my wife's mystery lawyer showing up asking questions." The senator, who owed Griffin far more than a friendly 9 holes, promised to make some calls. In Highland Park, that phrase alone was usually enough to bend an outcome. That same afternoon, Griffin's mother, Delphine Halloway, sat across from him at the country club, sipping iced tea with the kind of composure that made her terrifying in board meetings and family dinners alike. "She's never really been one of us, has she?" Delphine said, not quite a question. "Sweet girl. Grateful girl. But you don't marry the help and expect royalty, Griffin. You knew that going in." Griffin didn't correct his mother. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a version of himself, a younger, less certain version, remembered that Wren had paid off his father's hospital bill scare, or at least remembered hearing something about an anonymous donor around that time. He'd never connected the dots. Rich men rarely do. Connecting dots requires imagining that someone smaller than you might be the reason you're still standing. I've already drawn up the papers, Griffin said instead. Divorce filed Friday. I'll be generous. She'll get the house in Plano, maybe some cash. Nothing that touches the company. Delphine smiled the way mothers do when they've been quietly rooting for something for years. Good. And Jocelyn? Not yet. Give it 6 months. Optics. You're smarter than your father, Delphine said, patting his hand. He never knew how to protect what mattered. If Griffin had looked up at that exact moment, he might have noticed his mother's smile didn't quite reach her eyes either. The same expression his own guests had worn while laughing at a woman covered in wine. Cruelty in Highland Park had a way of running in families, quietly. Like a family recipe, nobody wrote down, but everyone somehow knew. 3 miles away, Wren sat in a conference room she'd rented under a name that wasn't Halloway, across from a lawyer named Elias Thorne, a man who had represented the Ashcombe Trust for 11 years and had never once asked Wren to explain herself. They're moving faster than we predicted, Elias said, sliding a folder across the table. Board vote's been quietly moved up. Friday morning, before the divorce filing even goes public. If it passes, Griffin gets full operational control of Halloway Group before you can contest anything. Then we move faster, Wren said. There's something else. Elias hesitated, which was rare for him. The Senator Griffin golfed with this morning. He's been trying to push through a zoning change that would let Halloway Group build on protected wetland outside the city. It's illegal, but it's been buried in paperwork for 2 years. If it passes Friday alongside the trust vote, Griffin gets total control of the company and a project worth $400 million, built on a violation nobody will be able to touch once it's underway. Wren looked at the folder without opening it. How long have you known? 8 months, Elias admitted. I was waiting for you to be ready to use it. I wasn't ready to destroy him 8 months ago, Wren said quietly. I think I might be now. Friday morning arrived the way most terrible mornings do. Quiet, sunny, deceptively normal. Wren was in the kitchen making coffee when the doorbell rang. She wasn't surprised to see the process server standing there. She'd expected him for 2 days. Wren Halloway? The young man asked, barely looking up from his clipboard. Yes. You've been served. He handed her a thick envelope and left before she could say anything else, the way people who deliver bad news for a living always do. Fast, polite, gone. Wren stood in the doorway holding the envelope for a long moment before she opened it. Divorce papers. Griffin's signature already on them, dated 3 days earlier. 3 days before the wine, before the party, before any of it. He hadn't decided to leave her because she'd embarrassed him. He'd already planned to leave her. The wine was just theater. A performance for an audience, a way to make himself feel powerful one last time before he threw her away in public and called it her fault. Griffin called that afternoon, his voice light, almost cheerful. You got the papers? I did. I want this to go smooth, Wren. No lawyers dragging it out. You keep the Plano house, a fair settlement, and we both move on. I don't want this ugly. There was a pause on the line. Wren could hear, faintly, a woman's laugh in the background. Jocelyn's laugh. The one that used to make family dinners feel warmer, now audible from inside Griffin's office at 3 in the afternoon. You're not even trying to hide it anymore, Wren said. There's nothing to hide, Griffin said. You had your chance to be something more, Wren. You chose to stay small. Wren closed her eyes. Somewhere behind them, she pictured the cedar box in her closet, the dress, the photograph, the scholarship letter, the wine cork from a night when Griffin used to look at her like she mattered. Friday's a big day for you, she said instead. The trust vote, the zoning approval, big plans. Something in Griffin's voice shifted, just slightly, the first flicker of unease. How do you know about the trust vote? I know a lot of things, Griffin, Wren said. You should ask your mother sometime who's been keeping this family's land and this family's company alive for the last 6 years. Ask her who really paid for your father's surgery. Ask her who saved the 40 acres from seizure. Ask her who's been sitting quietly in the boardroom under a name you've never bothered to learn. There was silence on the other end of the line, the kind of silence that comes right before a man realizes he's been standing on ground that was never his to begin with. "What are you talking about?" Griffin said. It wasn't a question anymore. It was the beginning of fear. Rin looked out the kitchen window at the perfect green lawn, the perfect Highland Park sky, the perfect life that had never once actually belonged to her, because she'd built it, quietly, brick by brick, while everyone around her assumed she'd simply been lucky enough to marry into it. "You'll find out Friday morning," she said. "Enjoy the party, Griffin. It's the last one you'll ever throw as the man in charge." She hung up before he could respond. 2 miles across town, Griffin Halloway stood in his office holding a dead phone, feeling something he hadn't felt in years and couldn't name. He had no idea that the woman he'd just humiliated in front of 200 guests was the same woman whose signature sat quietly on the majority shares of his father's company. He had no idea the Ashcombe Trust, the mysterious name on every rescue, every favor, every quiet miracle that had saved his family for 6 straight years, belonged to his wife. Friday morning was going to change everything. And Ren Halloway was done being quiet. The Halloway Group boardroom sat on the 40th floor of a glass tower Griffin had personally chosen because the view made him feel like he owned the city underneath it. Friday, 9 in the morning. 12 board members sat around the long table. Bennett Halloway, frail now, sat at the head, wrapped in a cardigan despite the Texas heat outside. Delphine sat beside her son, already smiling like the outcome had been decided before anyone said a word. Griffin stood at the front with a folder full of documents that would transfer full operational control to him, alongside the zoning approval that would let Halloway Group build on $400 million worth of protected wetland before anyone could file a complaint. "Before we vote," Griffin said, "I want to thank my father for trusting me to carry this family forward." Bennett nodded weakly. He didn't fully understand the paperwork in front of him anymore. His eyes weren't what they used to be, and his son had never once offered to walk him through it, line by line. The boardroom door opened. Ren walked in wearing a plain navy suit, no jewelry except the thin gold watch she no longer bothered to hide. Beside her walked Elias Thorne, carrying a briefcase, and behind them, 2 more attorneys Griffin had never seen before. "You shouldn't be here," Griffin said, more surprised than angry. "This is a board matter." "I know," Ren said. "That's why I'm here." She sat down. Not at the edge of the table where guests usually sat, at the seat directly across from Griffin, the one that had been left empty for 11 years because everyone assumed it belonged to nobody in particular. "For 6 years," Ren said, "this company has been kept alive by an entity called the Ashcombe Family Trust. It paid off the seizure claim on the original 40 acres. It covered Bennett's surgery when the insurance company denied the claim. It funded the emergency credit line that saved this company from collapse 2 years ago. Every one of you signed paperwork referencing that trust without ever asking who controlled it." She placed a single document on the table and slid it toward Bennett. "I control it. I always have. My maiden name is Ashcombe. This company has been mine to lose since before Griffin ever took over his father's chair." The room went silent in a way Highland Park boardrooms rarely go silent. Not polite silence, but the kind that happens right before the floor disappears under everyone's feet. Bennett Halloway looked at the document for a long moment. Then he looked at Ren, and something in his tired eyes cleared, like a man remembering a dream he'd almost convinced himself wasn't real. "You?" he said quietly. "It was you the whole time." "Yes, Bennett," Ren said gently. "It was me." Griffin laughed. A short, panicked sound. The laugh of a man trying to convince a room he isn't afraid. "This is insane. She's my wife. Whatever she's holding, I'll contest it in the divorce." "You can try," Ren said. "But the trust that owns 51% of Halloway Group voting shares was never marital property, Griffin. It existed 6 years before I married you disguised as someone with nothing. You didn't marry a poor woman who got lucky. You married the person who's been saving your family the entire time you were busy taking credit for surviving." Griffin didn't fall apart in the boardroom. Men like Griffin rarely do. Not in public, not on the first blow. He smiled, thanked the board for their time, and walked out like a man who still believed he had a move left. He did. By that evening, 3 of Rin's personal accounts were frozen. Griffin's banking contact, the executive whose default he'd once quietly forgiven, had flagged the accounts as part of an ongoing fraud investigation tied to unusual trust transfers. It wasn't true. It didn't need to be true. It only needed to hold for 72 hours, long enough to keep Rin from moving assets before the next vote. By Saturday, 2 of Rin's attorneys had suddenly withdrawn from the case, citing conflicts of interest that appeared out of nowhere. One of them had a son recently hired at a firm connected to the state senator Griffin had golfed with days earlier. Funny how favors travel in circles that small. By Sunday, a local business paper, one that regularly ran ads for Halloway Group developments, published a story with the headline, "Hidden Trust or Hidden Fraud? Questions surround Ashcombe entity's claim on Halloway Group." Griffin didn't write the article. He didn't need to. He simply made sure the right editor got a phone call, and the right doubts got planted. Delphine posted a photo that afternoon, smiling beside Griffin at the company's 40th floor office, captioned, "Proud of my son for protecting what our family built." Under the photo, Jocelyn Kane commented 3 laughing emojis and the words, "Some people will do anything to steal a legacy that was never theirs." The comments filled with strangers agreeing. Rin sat alone in a rented office that evening, watching her account sit frozen, her lawyers gone, her name being dragged through a story that made her sound like a con artist instead of the person who'd quietly kept an entire family standing for 6 years. For the first time since the wine hit her face, she looked, for just a moment, like she might actually lose. If you've ever done everything right and still watched it get twisted into something ugly by someone louder than you, you already know exactly how that room felt. Elias Thorne walked into the office holding his phone, his expression unreadable. "They think they've won," he said. "Griffin's already scheduling a press conference for Monday morning. Full legacy transfer. He's going to announce it publicly, with your account still frozen and your name still in the papers as a fraud." Rin was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, she smiled. The same small, calm smile she'd worn the night the wine hit her face. "Good," she said. "Let him." Elias frowned. "Good?" "He just told 200 people, 3 lawyers, a bank executive, and a newspaper editor exactly how he cheats," Rin said. "I needed him overconfident. I needed him public. Now I need one more thing." She reached for her phone. "Get Priscilla Dunmore on the line." Here's something Griffin never learned about his wife. She didn't plan the way he did, with favors and phone calls and men who owed him golf debts. She planned the way water does. Quiet, patient, finding every crack long before anyone noticed the pressure building. Priscilla Dunmore had noticed the watch at the anniversary party for a reason. 6 months earlier, her husband's failing restaurant chain had been quietly bought out of debt by an entity she'd never heard of, the Ashcombe Trust. She'd spent months trying to find out who'd saved her family, and the anniversary party was the first time she'd seen a clue slip loose from under Rin's sleeve. Rin had known Priscilla was watching that night. She'd let the watch show on purpose. "I need you to do something for me," Rin said now, over the phone. "Something that will make you a target if it goes wrong." "You saved my family without asking for anything," Priscilla said. "Tell me what you need." What Rin needed was simple. Priscilla's husband sat on the State Banking Oversight Board, the same board that could investigate exactly why a bank executive had frozen Rin's accounts based on an investigation that officially didn't exist anywhere in writing. By Sunday night, that board had opened a formal inquiry, not into Rin, into the bank. At the same time, Elias filed something Griffin never anticipated, proof, collected quietly over 8 months, that the zoning approval for the wetland development had been pushed through in exchange for campaign contributions that were never legally disclosed. The senator who owed Griffin a favor suddenly owed federal investigators an explanation instead. And the recording, the one where Griffin bet a friend $1,000 he could humiliate his wife in front of 200 guests, found its way, quietly and untraceably, into the inbox of every reporter who'd covered the hidden fraud story over the weekend. Wren hadn't lost the weekend. She'd spent it letting Griffin build a stage tall enough to fall from. Monday morning, Griffin Halloway stood in front of a room full of cameras, ready to announce full control of Halloway Group and the wetland development that would make him one of the wealthiest men in Texas. He never got through his opening line. A reporter in the second row raised her hand before he'd even said, "Good morning. Mr. Halloway, is it true a recording exists of you betting a friend $1,000 that you could publicly humiliate your wife at your own anniversary party?" Griffin's smile flickered, just slightly. "I don't know where you're getting your information." "It's already online," the reporter said, "along with messages between you and Jocelyn Kane discussing a divorce timeline dated weeks before your wife allegedly, quote, embarrassed you at that same party. Can you comment on reports that the zoning approval for your wetland project is now under federal review for undisclosed campaign contributions?" The room, which moments earlier had been full of cameras waiting to celebrate him, turned into something closer to a courtroom. By that afternoon, the banking board's inquiry became public, along with proof that Wren's accounts had been frozen using a fabricated investigation. Every major outlet that had run the hidden fraud story ran a correction within hours, the kind of correction that gets far less attention than the original headline, but does its job anyway once people start comparing dates. Delphine's phone stopped ringing the way phones stop ringing for people whose usefulness has quietly expired. The country club friends who'd laughed loudest at the wine incident suddenly had nothing to say at all. Jocelyn Kane posted nothing that day. By evening, she'd deleted every photo of Griffin from her account, the way people do when they've already started planning their next target. And Wren simply walked into the same 40th floor boardroom, calm as ever, and placed a single signed order on the table in front of the emergency board session Elias had called that morning. Full transfer of Ashcombe Trust voting power. Effective immediately. Griffin removed from operational control, pending a full ethics investigation into the zoning approval and the frozen accounts. 12 board members voted, 11 in favor. Griffin's one vote, his own, didn't matter anymore. That evening, Wren drove to the Highland Park house she'd lived in for 11 years, one last time. Griffin was there, sitting alone in the dark living room. No lawyers, no mother, no cousin. Just a man surrounded by furniture that had never actually belonged to him, in a house whose deed, it turned out, had quietly transferred to the Ashcombe Trust 3 years earlier as collateral he'd forgotten he'd signed away during the credit line rescue. "You planned this from the beginning," he said, not looking up. "The whole marriage. You were just waiting." "No," Wren said. "I was hoping for a long time that you'd become someone worth staying for. I kept saving this family because I loved parts of it. Your father, before he got tired. Your siblings, before they learned to look past me the way you did. I didn't plan your downfall, Griffin. You built it yourself, one favor and one humiliation at a time. I just stopped protecting you from it." She set a small cedar box on the coffee table and opened it. Inside sat the wine-stained dress, still folded exactly the way she'd left it 3 weeks earlier. "I almost washed this the next morning," Wren said. "I'm glad I didn't. It reminds me exactly who you are, in case I ever forget." Griffin stared at the dress like it was the first honest thing he'd seen in years. "What happens now?" he asked, quieter than she'd heard him in a long time. "Now," Wren said, closing the box, "you find out what it feels like to stand outside a door you used to own." 3 weeks later, it rained in Highland Park for the first time in a month, the kind of rain that turns perfect green lawns dark and heavy, the kind that doesn't care whose zip code it falls on. Griffin Halloway stood outside the Ashcombe Trust's new downtown office. No umbrella, no driver waiting, no mother beside him. He'd lost the ethics case. He'd lost the wetland project, now permanently blocked. He'd lost his seat on the Halloway Group board. The company that bore his family's name now answered, quietly and completely, to his wife. He'd asked for a meeting 11 times that week. 11 times, he'd been told no. On the 12th try, he showed up in person, soaked through his suit, and asked the security guard at the door if he could just have 5 minutes. "No appointment, no entry," the guard said. "Miss Ashcombe's orders." Miss Ashcombe, not Holloway. She'd taken her name back the same week she'd taken everything else. Griffin stood there in the rain for almost 2 hours. People walking past recognized him. The man who'd once gotten stop signs moved with a phone call, standing outside a glass building with nowhere left to go and no one left willing to let him in. When Rin finally walked out that evening, flanked by 2 members of her new executive team, she saw him standing there, drenched, smaller than she remembered him ever looking. "I can't do this without you," Griffin said, stepping forward. "The legacy. My father's name. I need—" "I know," Rin said, cutting him off. Not unkindly, just finally. "You told me once you didn't think about me at all. I believed you, Griffin. I still do." She walked past him, exactly the way he'd once walked past her, wine dripping down her face, in front of 200 laughing guests. "You poured wine on your maid to prove you were in control," she said over her shoulder. "Now the maid owns everything, and she doesn't need you standing in the rain to prove it." She got into the car waiting at the curb. It pulled away, leaving Griffin Halloway standing exactly where he'd left her 3 months earlier, alone, humiliated, and finally understanding what it costs to spend a marriage assuming the quiet person across the table has nothing left to teach you. 6 months later, Halloway Group didn't exist anymore. In its place stood the Ashcombe Legacy Group, run by a board that included Bennett Halloway, now retired, but finally at peace with a company that no longer required him to pretend his son had built it alone. Griffin's younger siblings, the ones whose education Rin had quietly funded for years, learned the truth eventually, not from Griffin, who never spoke to them again after the divorce finalized, but from Rin herself, over coffee, the way family should learn things. Delphine sent one letter, unopened, returned to sender. Jocelyn Kane moved to Houston. Nobody in Highland Park mentioned her name again. Griffin Halloway, once a man who could move stop signs with a phone call, now worked a mid-level sales job 2 states away, in a city with no country club, no board seats, and no wife quietly saving him from consequences he'd spent his whole life avoiding. Rin Ashcombe kept one thing from her old life, the cedar box, still sitting on a shelf in her new office, dress folded neatly inside. Not as a trophy. As a reminder, the kind you keep not because you're still angry, but because forgetting how you were treated is its own kind of danger. And if there's one thing worth carrying out of Highland Park with you today, let it be this. The people who quietly keep showing up for you, asking nothing in return, are rarely as small as you've convinced yourself they are. Look twice. Ask questions. Don't wait for the rain to teach you what you should have already known. If Rin's story moved you, hit like, subscribe for more stories like this one, and tell us in the comments. What would you have done differently if you were in her shoes?